Protectors of the Grid. Chapter 46. The address they were looking for was on Pine Street, a couple blocks up from Van Ness. It was a tall, narrow Victorian apartment building, sandwiched in between two similar buildings. They pressed the buzzer for Lee number 101 and waited for the intercom. Instead, they heard light footsteps coming down the hall. The front door opened slightly. Yes? Lingley? The slight woman with a streak of white shooting from her widow's peak to the crown of her shiny black pageboy blocked the entry. Yes. May we come in and talk with you briefly? What about? About your brother Leonard and the work he's doing for our company, Cybershark. Something flickered in Lingley's eyes, almost too quick to notice. Who are you? We're security consultants for Cybershark, a technology company out of San Diego, if we can have just a few minutes to talk with you. She started to close the door, but Will shoved it, gently but quickly, throwing her off balance. By the time she recovered, Will was already through, Tara right behind him. They stopped just inside and waited politely. Lingley stood there, looking up at them. A look of resignation crossed her face. Finally, she turned and led them down the hall to the first apartment on the right, then gestured for them to enter. It was a tiny studio apartment with a barred bay window whose only view was the blank wall of the building an arm's length away. The light from the floor lamp beside the sofa reflected off the white clapboard next door and back into the apartment. Lingley gestured to the sofa, then sat stiffly on the edge of a ladder-back chair on the other side of the small coffee table. "Thank you for seeing us, Lingley," Tara began. The older woman shrugged, her almond-shaped eyes shadowed, her face bland. Inscrutable, Tara thought, but there's something here. "Have you seen Leonard?" Tara asked gently. Lingley gestured around the tiny apartment. "Do you see anyone here?" There was bitterness beneath her words. "Go ahead, look around." She watched Will assess their surroundings, saw him spot the ladder leading to the loft above them, nodded her assent for him to climb up high enough to assure himself that no one was there. "Have you heard from or seen Leonard in the last few days?" Lingley shook her head silently. "Leonard is your brother, right?" "Half-brother," Lingley spat the words. "Different fathers?" Tara persisted, gently still because she could feel the depth of pain and sadness flowing from Lingley. Lingley nodded. "What is your relationship with Leonard like?" Lingley shrugged. "Please, Lingley, talk to us," Tara pleaded gently. "Please tell us what you know. We're trying to put the pieces together, and we're not sure what to think about Leonard. His background check before he was hired turned up nothing but stellar recommendations, but his behavior in the last week has us alarmed. This launch is critical not only for Cybershark, but for all the people who will benefit from the technology. We are doing everything we can to protect this technology from misuse, but the danger will always exist. Will you help us?" Lingley stared at her. Tara continued, "We know that your mother left you with friends when she fled to South Korea. We know she almost went nuts trying to get back to you, right? She talked about you all the time to Leonard when he was growing up. What happened to you?" Lingley ducked her head and pressed the tips of her fingers to her eyes. When she looked up, her eyes were dark pools of painful memories, and her mouth a thin, bitter line. "You want to know what life in an orphanage was like under Mao?" Tara gasped, then nodded. "The people my mother left me with were rounded up shortly after she left. The soldiers who took them away took me to the nearest orphanage. The people there didn't want me, argued with the soldiers that they didn't have room or food enough as it was, but in the end the soldiers scared them into taking me. There were 37 children in that place. The only good thing about being so crowded was that sleeping so many in a bed kept us from freezing on cold nights. We were always cold, always hungry, nothing but a handful of rice with a few vegetables to eat, and always afraid. We often heard screams as the soldiers dragged people away or stabbed them with bayonets for resisting." Will was sitting on the sofa beside Tara and leaned forward, listening intently. 58 million people died during Mao's regime. It must have been awful. And you? You were only 4 years old? My God, you must have been terrified." Lee nodded again. "I was too young to know those kinds of things, but I remember the fear. I remember feeling frozen inside. I couldn't even cry. Everyone was afraid. It made the people who ran the orphanage sharp and edgy. We were careful not to provoke them." The pain of Lee's memories was palpable in the room. Tara prompted her. How did you survive, Ling Li? I got adopted. Adopted? Yes. Papa had been stationed in Korea during the Korean War. The woman he took to be his, to keep his house, had his baby, but then he got seriously wounded and shipped back to the U.S. for treatment. They lost touch. Eventually he married and took my mama with him to South Korea to try to find the woman and child he had left behind. Your mama must have been an extraordinary woman to acknowledge another woman and child. Ling Li's face softened. She was, and she really loved Papa. They never found them, though. Mama thought if they could find a Eurasian child about the same age, it would help him heal. But you are Chinese, not Korean, and you were in China, weren't you? How? Ling Li smiled a sad, twisted little smile. In a way, I got lucky. Mixed blood children are scorned in China as well as Korea. Again, it was Will who spoke, his whole attention on Ling Li. Everywhere, Ling Li. Mixed blood children are outcasts everywhere, especially as the debris of war. Their fathers were the enemy, and their mothers were considered soiled, especially after the men leave. Ling Li nodded. Mama said the news coming out of Vietnam and South Korea disturbed many people in the U.S. They wanted to help, or really wanted children. Once there was a market, there were other people who looked for pretty Eurasian children everywhere to sell. Many can't tell people from one Asian country from another. If we had slant eyes and they liked the way we looked, they didn't really care what the truth was. Will nodded again, his sympathy wrapping around Ling Li like a soft, warm blanket. Yeah, all Asians are just gooks to some people. Ling Li nodded again. In China, they were happy to sell orphans, no questions asked. They picked me and 3 other kids. I was a little old, 4 years, but they liked me because I could speak English. They brought us to the orphanage in Seoul, where Mama and Papa found me. So you grew up in the U.S.? Will asked, curiosity deepening the crease in his forehead. Yes, Arlington. Texas or Virginia? Virginia. Papa was career military. Arlington, VA, Tara's home turf. She glanced at Will and knew he had caught it too. Ling Li, what about Leonard? Tara desperately wanted to connect the dots. Ling Li's mouth tightened and her eyes darkened. Be careful what you ask for, she murmured under her breath. The orphanage in Seoul knew that my birth mother was Anglo only because I spoke English as well as Mandarin. Apparently, I had already begun to learn Korean too, by the time Mama and Papa took me to the U.S. Leonard? Tara inserted, hoping to hurry up the process. I worked all my life as a translator for the Pentagon. Last year, I was assigned to a diplomatic tour of Korea with a group of medical personnel from a MASH unit near the DMZ. We went all over, taking pictures and shaking hands. Propaganda? Will guessed. Ling Li nodded. One of the doctors kept staring at me. Halfway through the tour, he asked me about my background. I told him about Mama and Papa and the orphanage in Seoul. He looked strange, then told me about this pregnant woman in Seoul he had helped give birth so many years ago. Apparently, I look like an Asian version of her. We eventually discovered it was my birth mother. So that's how you knew you had a sibling? Tara was determined to keep Ling Li on track. Yes, Dr. Blackwell had retired from Walter Reed Military Med Center. He helped me track down the air cargo manifest for the transport that took them back to the U.S. That gave us her name and the name of her baby, Langley. Her name was Miriam Langley, and she named her baby Leonard. Ling Li leaned against the back rungs of the chair, no longer so stiff and defensive. I never got to meet her. She died of cancer years ago, but I hoped to get to know her through Leonard, so I kept trying to find him. Miriam Langley had stayed where she landed, which just happened to be Font Myer. Dr. Blackwell found Leonard, traced him to the Virginia Military Institute, and then to the Defense Language Institute. The one in California, Monterey? Yes, apparently language skills run in the family. He was an Asian language specialist who was assigned to the American Embassy in Seoul before being transferred back to the Pentagon. That's how we found him. How did he respond when you contacted him? He didn't at first. He didn't answer any of our inquiries through the South Korean consulate, none of our emails, but finally he answered a letter from Dr. Blackwell on military letterhead. And he asked a lot of questions. Seemed disinterested until he learned about my work as a translator. Then he agreed to meet. When was that? About 9 months ago. The weight of Ling Li's sadness was crushing. It was awful. He looked at me like I was a cockroach or something, said his mother never stopped talking about me and barely noticed him, said she kept searching for years and when she finally gave up, she was diagnosed with cancer. He blamed me, said she gave up on life because she couldn't come to terms with losing me. How awful, Tara whispered. But the worst was... Ling Li sat up straight, her knuckles white from where her hands gripped the arms of the ladder-back chair. The worst was when he called a few months later and invited me to dinner. I thought he'd had time to get used to the idea of me as a sister. I really wanted to know more about my mother, but instead, he wanted to make a business deal. He said that with my language skills and appearance, I could make a lot of money helping him negotiate between China and Korea. Negotiate what? I don't know, some kind of secret technology. He said both China and Korea were salivating over it, and if we played it right, we could drive the price up. Both Will and Tara froze. Why would he need you when he's a language specialist himself? I asked him that. He said because of my father. The father you never met. Lee nodded. Leonard said my father was Chinese and part of Mao's inner circle. When the Great Leap Forward failed and Mao lost power for the first time in 25 years, my father was arrested. He was tortured and executed. Then when Mao returned to power a few years later, all the martyrs became heroes. Apparently, my father was glorified as a hero of the Cultural Revolution. Leonard thinks that would give him, an in with key people in China now. But that was in the 1960s, more than 50 years ago, Tara exclaimed. Ling Li shrugged. Will spoke up. It's all PR anyway, depends on how it's presented and what the current hotshots think it will gain them. Ling Li nodded agreement. And because you were adopted from an orphanage in Seoul and speak Korean, I suppose so, Ling Li conceded. Tensions are high with North Korea's recent nuclear tests, as well as the ongoing tension between the Chinese governments in Beijing and Taipei. Will looked thoughtful. Two Chinese governments, two Korean governments, all competing. He gazed at Ling Li with hooded eyes. How do you feel about that, Ling Li? She straightened in the chair, defiant. I have no life except here in the U.S., no people except those who adopted me, and they have both died. How could I be anything but grateful? Our system is imperfect, but we have it so much better than anywhere else in the world. How could I align with China when millions of its people have died because of its politics? Korea is just as bad. My life would have been harder and probably shorter if I lived in China. No, this is home. I am a loyal citizen of the USA. There is nothing anywhere in the East for me. Do you expect to hear from Leonard again? Tara asked. After he got up and walked out on me when I refused to help him. Left me with the bill, too. He may be the son of my birth mother, but he is not my brother.